Hello and welcome to Basics for Gamers presents Counteracting Rules in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This video contains some of the information that was shared in our video on hazards, so although it's definitely not required to go view that video first, as the information in this video does stand on its own, you might want to check it out anyway just to see how counteracting works against magical traps. Counteracting occurs when one effect tries to undo another effect. A few examples might include drinking a panacea potion to cure a disease, casting Bless on an ally to remove the Bane effect from them, or disarming a magical trap by casting Dispel Magic on it. Although there are a few different circumstances where counteracting is used, they all follow the same general process. There are 5 pieces of information you will need when attempting to counteract something. The first is the character who is attempting to counteract must have an ability, an item, or some other characteristic that grants them the power to counteract the targeted effect. The character will also need to know what their counteract modifier is and what their counteract level is. The GM will need to know the targeted effect's counteract DC and the targeted effect's counteract level. When a character attempts to counteract an effect, they roll a counteract check, which is 1d20 plus their counteract modifier. That total is then compared to the targeted effect's counteract DC, much like any other check in the game, except that the ultimate result depends on the difference between the target's counteract level and the character's counteract level. Think of it this way. You have a bucket of water and you want to put out a campfire. The bigger the fire is, the higher its counteract level and counteract DC are. You try to douse the fire with your bucket of water and roll a counteract check. The total of that check represents your aim. Were you able to toss the water onto the fire, or maybe pour it with a great amount of skill? Or did you trip and miss the fire completely? Assuming you are able to succeed on that check, you then have to ask yourself, do I have enough water to put out a fire this size? Just like how a campfire's counteract level represents how big that fire is, your counteract level represents how much water is in the bucket. If there was only a teaspoon of water in the bucket, then your counteract level is 1. And if it was filled to the brim, maybe that counteract level is 8. So it's going to be a combination of both your ability to hit the fire with the bucket of water and a comparison between that fire's counteract level and your counteract level that determines the final result of the counteract attempt. On a successful counteract check, you put the fire out if its counteract level is no more than 1 higher than your counteract level. On a critical success, you put the fire out if its counteract level is no more than 3 higher than your counteract level. On a failure, you still put the fire out if its counteract level is lower than your counteract level. And on a critical failure, you don't put the fire out no matter how big your bucket of water is. Obviously, that was just for illustrative purposes, and your GM is probably not going to ask you to roll a counteract check to put out the morning campfire, but that example should provide a bit of a foundation for how this works. Counteract levels, modifiers, and DCs are often provided, but sometimes you will need to calculate them for yourself. Generally speaking, if the effect being counteracted is an affliction, then its counteract DC and level will likely be listed in that affliction stat block. And if you're using an item to counteract with, like a Rod of Negation, it will often tell you what your counteract level and modifier will be for that check. But more often than not, you will need to calculate these on your own when spells are involved. And the good news is, it's not terribly hard to do that. If the effect you are counteracting is a spell, then its counteract DC is the same as the spell DC of the person who cast it. If you're using an official stat block from one of the published adventures, then the work is done for you and the spell DC should be listed there for that casting character. If not, then the base spell DC is calculated as 10 plus the key ability modifier used for spellcasting, for example, intelligence for wizards, wisdom for clerics, or charisma for sorcerers, and then plus that character's spellcasting proficiency bonus. The base counteract modifier of the character attempting to counteract the effect using a spell is their spellcasting ability modifier plus their proficiency bonus. Essentially, this is the same as their spell attack bonus, except counteract checks are only modified by things that specifically state that they modify counteract checks and are not modified by any effect that would grant a bonus or a penalty to a spell attack roll. And counteract level is equal to the spell slot used to cast the spell. So if the effect to be counteracted is from a 3rd level spell, then its counteract level will also be 3, unless that spell was heightened and cast at a higher level, in which case you use that heightened level as its counteract level. And cantrips are automatically heightened to 1/2 the caster's level rounded up, so you would use that as the cantrip's counteract level, even though a spell slot is not being consumed when you cast it. And if a counteract level is not provided, then you can calculate it as 1/2 the level of the creature or object providing the counteract effect rounded up. Okay, now that we know the process and how to calculate the figures that are needed, let's see how this all fits together with a few examples. In our first example, we have a Hobgoblin Sorcerer and Ezran the Wizard. The Hobgoblin is 3rd level, has a charisma score of 14, and trained proficiency in arcane spellcasting. Ezran is a 5th level wizard, has an intelligence score of 19, and trained proficiency in arcane spellcasting. He also has the Counterspell feat. Counterspell allows a character to spend their reaction to exhaust one of their spells in order to counteract the spellcasting of another creature. But the catch is, it has to be the same spell. So when the Hobgoblin begins to cast Magic Missile, Ezran immediately uses his reaction to counter by casting his own Magic Missile spell. He has Magic Missile prepared using a 1st level spell slot and expends it as part of his Counterspell reaction. If he did not already have Magic Missile prepared and ready, then he would not be able to use Counterspell here. When this happens, Ezran exhausts his prepared Magic Missile spell as if he had cast it during his turn, except instead of attacking his foe and doing damage, he instead rolls a counteract check against the Hobgoblin. Before making the check, we need to be sure we have the 4 key pieces of information. The enemy's counteract level is equal to the spell slot they were using to cast Magic Missile. In this case, it was a 2nd level spell slot being used, and therefore the Hobgoblin has a counteract level of 2. Next, we need to know the counteract DC. Since this is a spell that is being counteracted, we know the counteract DC is equal to the spell DC of the creature who cast it. And we know spell DCs are calculated as 10 plus the key ability modifier plus proficiency bonus. Barring any additional bonuses or penalties, this DC should be the same as their spell attack bonus plus 10. So here, the Hobgoblin's spell DC is 10 plus 2 for having a 14 charisma, plus 5 for its proficiency modifier. And that proficiency modifier is 2 for being trained plus 3rd level. And this makes his final spell DC 17. That may feel very cumbersome, but remember, if you're using a stat block from an adventure or bestiary, then the spell DC is already provided. That takes care of the Hobgoblin. It has a counteract DC of 17 and a counteract level of 2. Now for Ezran. He used a 1st level spell slot to cast Magic Missile, so he has a counteract level of 1. His counteract modifier is calculated the same as the spell DC we did for the Hobgoblin, except it doesn't get that flat plus 10. So Ezran's counteract modifier is his intelligence modifier of plus 4, plus 7 more for his proficiency bonus, which is 2 for being trained, plus his level of 5th. This makes his counteract modifier plus 11. Again, barring any special bonuses or penalties, his Counteract modifier will be the same as his spell attack bonus, which makes this process a lot easier than it might seem. But always remember, anything that modifies a spell attack bonus does not also adjust the character's Counteract modifier. Bonuses and penalties must specifically say that they modify Counteract modifiers or Counteract checks in order to apply. So when Ezran expends his prepared magic missile spell to counteract the hobgoblins, he rolls 1d20 and adds 11. This total is then compared to the hobgoblin's counteract DC of 17. So if he rolls a 6 or higher on the d20, then the hobgoblin's magic missile spell is countered and has no effect. If Ezran rolls a 5 or lower, then he is unable to counter the hobgoblin's attack and the magic missiles deliver their regular damage. In our next example, Lim is a 10th level bard going undercover and disguising himself as a member of an evil cult. In preparation for this mission, he casts Nondetection on himself. This is normally a 3rd level spell, but he wants to avoid magical detection as much as possible, so he heightens it to 5th level before he casts it. He also has a base spell attack bonus of plus 19, ignoring any special bonuses or penalties. When he enters the cult's temple, a suspicious priestess casts Detect Alignment heightened to 2nd level to locate anyone who might be good aligned. She has a spell DC of 25. When she casts the spell, Ezran's non-detection spell attempts to counteract her Detect Alignment spell. As before, let's make sure we have the 4 key bits of information. The priestess's spell DC is 25. So unless there are any special bonuses or penalties included in that, her counteract DC will also be 25. And she casts Detect Magic heightened to 2nd level, so her counteract level is 2. Lim's spell attack bonus is plus 19. Therefore, again barring any special modifiers, his counteract modifier will also be 19. And he casts his non-detection spell heightened to 5th level, so his counteract level is 5. Lim rolls 1d20 plus 19 and compares the result to the counteract DC of 25, which is very promising for him. But the really good news here is since his counteract level is higher than the priestess's, then the only way he can fail is by rolling a critical failure. Remember, if your counteract level is higher than the effect that you are attempting to counteract, then you will still succeed with counteracting it even when you fail the counteract check. The only way to truly fail when your counteracting level is higher is to critically fail the check. And in our last example, Valeros is wielding a Frostbrand Greatsword and accidentally triggers a trap that produces a wall of fire in his path. One of the special properties of a Frostbrand sword is that it can be used to counteract magical fire. Doing so costs 2 actions, and then Valeros rolls a counteract check against the wall of fire. The sword stat block shows us that his counteract modifier is plus 27, and that is not further modified. You don't add Valeros' strength bonus, or character level, or proficiency bonus for greatswords, or anything else. It's just a straight up plus 27. That's easy enough, but next we need to know what Valeros' counteract level is. Unlike the counteract modifier, there's nothing in the Frostbrand stat block that shows specifically its counteract level. But the good news is this will be really easy to calculate. When the item or ability that is allowing you to make a counteract check is not a spell and does not provide a counteract level in its description, then you calculate it by dividing that item's level in half and rounding up. This is a 16th level sword, so its counteract level is 1/2 that, or 8. Now let's think about the wall of fire. We'll say the wizard who built the trap really wanted to keep people out, so he heightened the wall of fire spell to 9th level, which also means the counteract level is 9. As for the Counteract DC, he had to be a pretty powerful wizard to cast 9th level spells, so the GM stats the trap's creator out as a 17th level wizard with a base spell DC of 38. Valeros spends 2 actions and strikes the wall of fire with his Frostbrand sword. He rolls a counteract check of 1d20 plus 27. Because the wall of fire's counteract level is 1 higher than Valeros's, he needs to roll an 11 or higher on the die in order to destroy the wall of fire. If he rolls a 10 or lower, then he fails and may not attempt to counteract the same wall of fire again. Alright, how about a little bit of homework? Here's a problem for you to work out on your own, and feel free to leave a note in the comment area with your answer and any questions you might have. While battling a kobold wizard, Maurizio falls victim to the Feeble Mind spell. It was cast using a 6th level spell slot. The kobold who cast it is 11th level, has an intelligence score of 16, and expert proficiency with arcane spell attacks. Kyra attempts to counteract the effects of Feeble Mind by casting Remove Curse on Maurizio. Kyra is 11th level, has a wisdom score of 20, and expert proficiency with divine spell attacks. She is casting Remove Curse with a 4th level spell slot. So the questions for this homework assignment are, what are the Feeble Mind spell's counteract DC and that spell's counteract level, and what are Kyra's counteract modifier and her counteract level, and last, when Kyra rolls her counteract check, what is the minimum number needed on the die for her to remove the curse from Maurizio? Think about that for a moment, leave your answer in the comments section, and you might want to pause the screen now before we move on to the summary. In this video, we discussed counteracting. Counteracting occurs when one effect attempts to undo another effect, both of which are usually magical. When a character counteracts an effect, they must roll a counteract check. Often the bonus the character applies to their roll is provided by the stat block of whatever item or ability they are using for the counteract attempt. If the character is casting a spell, then their counteract modifier is calculated as spellcasting ability modifier plus spellcasting proficiency bonus. This is the same base calculation as spell attack bonus, but may differ from the character's spell attack bonus because the base counteract modifier is only further adjusted by bonuses and penalties that specifically affect counteract checks and not by any circumstance that would modify a spell attack roll. The counteract check is challenged by the target effect's counteract DC. If the effect being negated is a spell, then the counteract DC will be equal to the spell DC of the creature who cast the spell. And spell DC is equal to 10 plus that character's spell attack bonus. You also need to know the counteract level of both the targeted effect and the character who is attempting to counteract that effect. Again, this is often provided by stat blocks, but if it is not, then there are a couple of ways to calculate it. First, if a spell is being used, its counteract level is equal to that spell's spell level. And if an item is being used, you can calculate its counteract level as 1/2 of its item level rounded up. If the counteract check is equal to or higher than the counteract DC, then it negates the targeted effect as long as the target's counteract level is no more than 1 higher than their counteract level. If the counteract check is a critical success, then it negates the target's effect as long as the target's counteract level is no more than 3 higher than their counteract level. If the counteract check is a failure, then they still succeed in negating the targeted effect as long as the target's counteract level is lower than their counteract level. And on a critical failure, they fail to negate the targeted effect regardless of any counteract levels. With that, we'll bring this video to a close. If you found this video helpful, please give us a like, and don't forget to click that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss out on our future videos. Leave us a comment letting us know what topics you'd like to see covered in our future videos, and we can always be reached through our Twitter and Facebook pages too. If you'd like to use some of the maps that we feature in our videos in your own games, you can find them at Maps of Mastery. A link to that store can be found in the description. Thanks for watching, take care, and we'll see you soon with more basics for your favorite tabletop games.